Welcome to How to Grow Using AI, Machine Learning, and Intelligent Automation, a podcast by eClerks. We explore how AI and machine learning are being used to scale businesses from end to end. But that's not all. In each episode, our industry experts dive deep into topics like AI-enabled sales optimization, predictive analytics, AI-powered marketing, and machine learning for product personalization. I promise to give you the goods, the insights, and the strategies that you need to grow your business. I am your host, Nicholas Cole. Thank you for joining me on today. We have an exciting show for you today. If you're a bank or you're any kind of financial institution and you said to yourself, we want to automate our processes, we want to get into digital transformation, we want to get into this Chat GPT and all of the new technologies out there, today is your lucky day because we're going to talk about that today. Today, I have joining me Praveen Kesani. He is the head of transformation and digitalization at one of the biggest banks out there, one of the most respected banks out there, Wells Fargo. And so before we get into our topic on today, Praveen, just let us know a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I've been working with Wells Fargo for the last 16 years. Before that, I was in consulting. My journey into the financial services industry was conducted through the journey where in my consulting days, I had a lot of exposure to different financial services companies. And I joined Wells Fargo in the San Francisco location. And I've managed a portfolio of technologies all the way from managing digital channels to digital transformation. Back when digital transformation was not a buzzword, we used to have the portals and the single sign-ons, authentication as the focus, and gradually it's evolved to digitization of all sorts of forms. So currently managing a digitization portfolio for commercial banking and corporate investment banking.
Awesome. So Praveen, you have over 20 years of experience managing financial services. So just imagine yourself. So a bank says, or any kind of financial institution, they say, we want to get into digital transformation. We want to get into automation. We want to get into all of this AI thing, all of those things that are going on right now. But we don't know where to start. Can you give us an idea, some insights on what can a financial institution do to just get started?
Absolutely. So let me start with our own journey that we've been on and kind of correlate to industry and where is the industry and the industry going to. So as everybody knows, the expectations from the customer are constantly evolving. It's amazing to think that we did not have iPhones and smart TVs and all this interactiveness even 2 decades ago. So as the expectations evolve and the personal side, meaning as customers interact with their own home and friends and their own personal management, those expectations carry over to financial services. And on the banking side, although my group deals with commercial customers, it's the same with retail and commercial customers. So those expectations translate to the work. So in a world 2 decades ago, nobody would have thought that there would be applications on a mobile phone and there would be interaction with SMS and other social media and all the other ways. So as those expectations carry forward to the industry, we also have to evolve. So that's one aspect that we have to always keep in mind as we model our customer journeys. And increasingly, we no longer think of customer as just the external customer whom we are selling services and products. Even the employees that are working for the bank or the financial services are also customers because they use tools to enable, in turn, their customers. So a lot of focus in the last 5 years has been shifting to not just the external customer, but also how do you orchestrate and efficiently manage the customer journey? So for us, we had a roadmap. The pressures of digitization apply for everybody. What I mean by that is there is really no choice in this new era of, like I said, expectations are from every aspect, both for the retail customers, but also for people working in any industry. So if you have an offering, there are some table stakes, like you have to have a website, you have to have customer service. So there's some expectations already baked in. Now, in order to get competitive advantage, in order to be efficient, spending that dollar efficiently, and in order to motivate and garner the talent all of these aspects require that you be in the forefront of digitization. So as we were going through that road mapping and planning, as everybody went through the pandemic, we also had to jumpstart, accelerate, react to what happened. But the good outcome of that was that it accelerated a lot of the digitization efforts. So that kind of led to more emphasis and more budget on that whole process. Now, in terms of, I think every organization will have, unless they're starting new, it's a fintech or startup, then they have a clean slate, and it's an enviable state to be in because a lot of times, a lot of energy goes into what do we have, what's happening in production, and then where do we want to go? And it's never a change it, go from A to B. It's always about go from A.1 to A.10 to get to B, and then as you go along, what has changed and what has not changed, and how do we maintain both the current and future. And that's a lot of challenge, especially for the big banks, because we have a lot of systems, a lot of customers, and a lot of expectations that we have to live by. So I think every organization has to have a baseline of where they are and where they would like to go, but also, as you all would have heard, increasingly the outcomes are expected very fast. So what that means for us is that we have to be agile. I mean, agile not just in delivery, but agile in terms of thinking and the life cycle. So what I mean by that is that you have to start with the baseline and the target, but be flexible enough to change along the way. And change is not just expectations from customer and what the customer wants, but also market. I mean, obviously, everybody wants to make profit. So as you're selling your products and services, are you analyzing that? Are you taking that feedback and bringing it back? Are you servicing your customers the right way? So how do you improve that? And then in turn, add customer satisfaction and add that. And so all those outcomes have to be baked in as you go along the journey. And the last thing I'll say is a lot of times transformation is a very ubiquitous word. I mean, transformation can be anything. For me, transformation is about change. I mean, ultimately, it's changing from what you used to where you want to go. So, whether it's digital transformation or any kind of transformation, it's always important to understand the organizational construct of are you having enough stakeholders and sponsorship of where you want to go? And also, what are all the partners and stakeholders going to be reacting to and evolving as the journey goes on? So I think every organization should go through that. And then underlying all of that, you have to invest in people, obviously. Ultimately, you have to have the right talent to enable, implement, learn, and react to what the journey is. And then also invest in changing that as the market conditions change and as the journey changes. And then we can get into aspects of how do you then take that and then see where your data is, where your business process is, and how do you implement that along the way.
Awesome. So key things that you said there. You said the transformation means change. Ultimately, that's what that means. And also, you mentioned it also requires implementation. And so, if you're a financial institution, you're saying, okay, I know I need to change. We know we need to change to get from where we are to where we really want to be. We don't have the tech already inside. And so, there's going to require someone coming in from the outside or some implementation partner. Could you give us some insight on how do you go out and find a good implementation partner? And, what are some red flags or what are some good things that's required of a good implementation partner?
Absolutely. And even for a bank of our size, or any big banks or any big financial services, you no longer have the luxury of building everything in house because technology is changing, expertise not necessarily within your institution, and you don't get to best of breed if you just implement it on your own. So that's a great answer. Then how do you partner, right? I mean, partnership is not just about picking the right products, but like you mentioned, going along the journey and having that trust and having that partnership to be assured that they have what you have in mind. A couple of things I've learned. Ultimately, one of the realities that everybody is familiar with is, and just like you are in to make sure your shareholder and your customer is happy, those partners also have expectations. So don't expect anything free, right? I mean, ultimately, even if you have a good relationship, it's going to boil down to what are the incentives, and how do you work through that. So I think the real key aspects are obviously, you need to set expectations, but also just like you're measuring your own journey internally, you have to measure aspects of what are they bringing to the table? What did their story change? Are they having the right talent? And then obviously the supply chain aspects of it are vetted from a third party perspective, like, if they are under any kind of cybersecurity risk or any other risk, that's a given. But on top of it, let's say you have a partner that's part of your customer digital transformation. They are bringing something that you don't have. So the other aspect is be curious, ask questions, and validate that. Now, validation doesn't necessarily mean that you have the expertise within your group. A lot of times when we end up, like, we build a robotic process automation practice, we build ML practice. A lot of times we don't have the expertise, but we can always go to the industry. We can always go to our partners and ask the questions and validate. So I would say use those forums that are external and use that as a way of vetting both from outside in and inside out. The inside out aspect is validate with your developers, architects, and see how the partners are bringing that value add on top of just augmenting what you are having to implement your transformation. So those would be the key aspects to keep in mind.
Awesome. So just want to double down on something you mentioned there. So we talk about our partners. I'm talking about some of the things that should be on the checklist. So one question would be out there is like, where do I find these partners? I mean, are they on some type of list or do they come to you? Or where do you find these partners?
Sure. So organically, since we are part of the industry, we do have a good catalog of who are out there, and we do vet that. Now, that does not always work out, especially when you have evolving technology or evolving journeys in terms of digital transformation. So, what we have found is that you always have to be open, meaning that just because you have a catalog that supply chain or somebody supplied to you, don't necessarily stick to that. Question again, use those contacts, industry, and both internal, external. And it's amazing, both when I was a consultant and now, it's amazing how many things you find out by going outside of your regular meetings and creating those relationships. A lot of times I will come with an insight in a part of a bank that even the folks working within the bank are not aware, because it's so complex. I mean, we are a world within the bigger ecosystem. So it's always important to have those questions and relationships to get the data and insights. So that's key. And then, like I said, even when you have an answer, meaning there's a respected partner, vendor, SI that everybody's using, don't take it for granted, because everybody has a context. Your organization will be unique in terms of where you are, where do you want to go, and what you have available, and what your expectations from both your internal and external customer are. So always validate that, and don't assume that just because vendor A is very reputed doesn't mean that you always have to use it. And a lot of times we found that the smaller, medium-sized vendors play a key role because they're more flexible and they're eager to prove themselves. So we've used that to partner and say, hey, we are also in our formative stages. Let's partner. Why don't you bring your ideas? What are you seeing out there? And then once they go through and implement, then we also do a retrospective and say, hey, this talent worked. These are things that did work. You didn't supply the right governance, whatever it is, right? And then when you see them reacting to that, that's also when you learn, hey, are they just ticking off check boxes? Are they just sending you invoices? So are they just taking you out for lunch? I mean, all those aspects, clear out. And then, you get to know who works out and who doesn't.
That's fascinating. The humorous is at the same time. And so, I mean, it can get humorous. I mean, there's a lot going on and a lot that goes into this, but having the right partner will make everything smooth, everything work out for you. So I want to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned something earlier. You mentioned cybersecurity. And so, as you know, over the past 12 months, one of the biggest things that's been dominating the news is generative AI. So financial institutions, a lot of them are saying, I'm just blown away by what you can do with generative AI. But what happens to our data? And so could you give us some insights on how do you address some data privacy concerns that may be involved here?
Absolutely. So you're exactly right. I mean, the data is basis for everything that we have to do to then take advantage of, whether it's the new generative AI, or even in our current journey, we have several ML AI feature functionality that we're working on. So, but everything relies on data. And as a bank, our biggest commitment to our customers is to keep their money, their data safe. So that goes hand in hand. I mean, nobody wants even a perception that there's a risk. I mean, a lot of times in cybersecurity, it's not whether a breach happened this year or not. Even if the customers feel like there is a perception of, hey, these guys are risky, or this vendor or this bank, then all bets are off. And that's what you're up against. So you have to prove yourself day in and day out across all of the channels and exposures that you have. So data is very, very key. And in fact, we do not take risk just because of that, because our journey into using cloud, we're now on a multi-cloud journey just because we are very careful about not adopting something right away, because we want to have that minimal risk across the perimeter, across the internal aspects of how we use data. So thinking about data, we have all the practices to keep data at rest and data in flight secure by using technology. But on top of that, it's also about classifying the data, right? Identification of the data and lineage. And then it's no joke. I mean, the data is multiplying exponentially. And also what has come to forefront is that we have realized that, even with the data lakes and the oceans and the rivers that everybody was trying to grasp, it's never possible to streamline and transform all of your data. So we have to pick your priorities. You have to be very careful as to, how you're bringing that data for your applications, and then in turn, realizing that for your customers. So if you have good practices of managing data, identifying data, and then exposing the data, we are finding that those divisions, those lines of businesses, and those financial services organizations have a bigger advantage with the advent of generative AI and other AI tools that are coming along. Now, having said that, you also have to be very careful of, and every bank and financial service is going through it. So if you want to take advantage of a model or a large language model or any other model that is outside of your bank, then how do you marry that with what you have internally? And what you have internally is sacrosanct because it's your customer, it's your competitive advantage. Now, how do you then marry that with what the industry has, and how do you take advantage? And back to the same thing, like you don't have all the expertise. The Microsofts and the OpenAIs and those big organizations have the advantage, but it's sacrosanct that you first understand what you have, then go experiment. A lot of the ways that we go adopt new technologies is we have a big group exclusively for innovation, and I call it experimentation because that's how you learn. And once we prove, then we take it back and implement it, and then it becomes a common mainstream.
Awesome. So you mentioned something that interests me. You said that data is key. And so you think that would be that's a no-brainer, but it's the fact that you said it the way that you said it. I just said, okay, we need to double back on that. Data is key. So could you give our listeners an idea, like one practical example of how can data enhance the customer experience?
Oh, absolutely. So let me think through the very recent example that we have onboarding journey. Like any services for our customers, when they choose our products and services, we have to go through series of rules and business processes. So let's say a customer signs up for Wells Fargo Bank. So you have to then onboard the customer, especially in the commercial space. We have a lot of regulations. So you have to know your customer, you have the KYC, you have the AML, the anti-money laundering rules. So you have to go through a series of validations to even vet the customer saying, hey, we know who the customer is, we know what type of industry they are, and whether they are a risk to the bank or not, and you have to check off, and then you need to put that. So that itself takes time. As a customer, they have their own obligations. So they also are waiting. So if the customer is going through acquisition, and if the customer is changing locations, the speed at which you can validate onboard is key. So what we are trying to understand then is, okay, there are human interactions, whether it's your relationship team, your sales team that is talking to the customer, is bringing in aspects. And then how do you then assimilate that and expedite their journey? So as we are going through that in a formal world, a lot of this would be high touch relationships. So somebody from the relationship team would sit with the customer, they would answer questions, then the relationship team brings it back. And so what we are now trying to do is digitize the whole process, eliminate inefficiencies, and expedite that. So as we go along that, so some of the aspects of data are very straightforward, meaning you need to collect data, you need to validate data, and then stitch it together and then get it to the customer. Now, some of the non-intuitive ways, which is an example, is sometimes when you're collecting the data from the customer is going through a form and it has in some cases 50 fields. And so it's very inefficient to expect an accountant or a CFO sitting on the other side to go through that. So what we are trying to do is marry the validation, not just by validating the data that the customer is supplying, but bring data from third parties. So we have Refinitives and other vendors that have a collection of data that they have vetted that is in various industry vetted data stores. So we bring that data and say, hey, by the way, your legal entity has all of these attributes that we already know. So why don't we present it to you and let the customer validate instead of entering everything? So that not only helps the customer, but also helps us because A, our own validation will take lesser time. B, the customer feels like it's very intuitive and we are helping the customer and it expedites the whole process. So there are a lot of ways in which you can marry data that you already have or get it from other places. But again, the key is making sure that you have a good sense of where the data is and where the data has been and whether you have validated it or not and bringing that together. So that would be an example. And there are various examples like that where data plays a key role in enhancing the value of the overall journey.
Right. Awesome. That's great. So I want to go back on something else you mentioned in that answer. So you mentioned relationships. And so oftentimes when you go into, say we're going to automate our processes. So we're going to implement some change. And so sometimes you also have your employees they're a big part of your relationships. And so that can be scary. It can be a little uncertain. And so just think if you're any kind of financial institution and say, okay, we want to do this, but we don't want to rock the boat at the same time. And so how do you reassure your employees that, hey, this is not here to get rid of you, but this actually can enhance your position. It actually can work alongside of what you're already doing. How do you address those concerns?
It's a key part of digital transformation, and especially for a financial services organization. Like I said, everybody is under pressure to stretch the investment and also make overall journey as efficient as possible. And we deal with it on a daily basis. This whole notion of, like I said, we don't have the luxury of just building new systems. We always have something existing, and there is always production. Part of my responsibility is if anytime a customer is facing an issue, it is with one of my platforms, which is in my group that our group manages. The buck stops with me. I can't call anybody else and say, hey, by the way, I have something going on. Can I get back to you after 3 days? No, I get on the production line and I have to solve it that day because the customer is waiting. So those expectations are also there, like you said, for our other teams, employees. So there are relationship teams, like I said, and sales teams that interact with the customers and they have their own tools, they have their own expectations. And especially, the sales folks can be very cranky. I mean, you don't never want to get into a conversation where they're feeling that their target is at threat. So we have all those conversations through our business partners because they are then trying to implement these new systems while assuring, like you said, that the existing systems will still work. And also those employees are still motivated to do their job and not think that, oh my God, this bot or agent is going to take away my job. This business transformation is going to take away my job. So what we found useful is that a couple of things. So one, when we embark on that roadmap or the implementation journey or the implementation process, it's not only the sponsoring unit, meaning the transformation unit that's doing the job and implementing, but the stakeholders. It's very key that we understand these stakeholders. And these stakeholders, in this case, the relationship teams, the implementation teams, the customer support teams, all these ecosystem that are impacted. It's very important to understand, okay, if you're replacing their system, do you have a good sense of what their journey is going to be? Because for them, it's just one part of their job. For us, sitting in the transformation, it's our whole job. And on most days, it's our whole job. So you always have to put on that cap of, hey, it's only one part of their job that you're trying to change. They still have to do everything else. So you better understand how you're going to assure them that they can still do their job and get to where they are. And then sometimes you have these difficult conversations. Obviously, as we get efficient, the nature of the job is going to change. So for somebody who has been sitting with the customer, collecting the data, having some decisions to make, and then relaying back to customer, some of it will go away. And that's where we are all, even my own developers, with the advent of Copilot and all, some of the routine development tasks will go away. And that's something that you have to set expectations. And we go to their managers and make sure that they're talking about it. And it's not something that's just lingering and, oh, nobody talks about this. No. So we want to talk about it upfront, and a lot of education into, hey, yes, bots are going to be deployed, but bots are not substitute for humans. They may be substitute for some part of what you're doing, but they're not a whole substitute. And so if you upskill, you are in a better place, keep your job, but also get a better job and contribute back to the bank in terms of customers, shareholders, and all that. So I think it's important for you to make sure that the organizations and the stakeholders that you're working with understand that. And as you're going along the journey, take the feedback. Sometimes you get approval in the beginning because, especially we are a large organization, we tend to forget that that roadmap was set 2 years ago. And a lot of things change from then to now. It's important for you to then say, hey, you thought this tool is going to work, but it's no longer relevant because XYZ events happen. And so you have to revalidate and then change. That's where I talk about flexibility. You can't have just point A to point B journey. So as things change, you need to be flexible to change. And so that would be things to keep in mind.
Okay. So it basically, in a nutshell, it's a win-win for the organization and for the employees. And so I'm just fascinated about where things are going in technology, AI, generative AI, and all of this stuff. And so, in that same vein, as you look at the landscape, generative AI, automation, what excites you about what's going on in the world of technology and how that is being integrated in financial services?
It is exciting times indeed. So I think as you get comfortable with change, you find it fascinating that just when you thought that we've gone through all the change that we could, there's that next generation coming along, right? And so it's very important to keep in mind that disruption will happen not in a linear way, but it happens in leaps and bounds. So you have to get used to it. And then that's where I tend to tell my group that, hey, if we lose our job, it's actually probably a good thing because that is no longer a requirement. We have worked ourselves out and we're going on to the next best thing. So it's always important to keep in mind, as these technologies are coming, but also, I mean, it's an amalgamation of or a unification of so many other things. So talked about AI, you talked about generative AI and automation with robot, like for ourselves, we in the last 3 years invested a lot in robotic process automation. So, but there are several other things coming from a technology side that is going to impact us, whether it is quantum computing. I mean, some of our innovation team is working on quantum computing, not by ourselves, but again with partners to see what that means. Security is going to change. It's amazing the amount of computing we do already, but the amount of time it takes to compute is going to radically change. So how do you adapt to that? And then with all of this, it's just amazing to think where else can we go, but also all the implications that translate to us through technology, through our interaction, will also translate into our jobs. So you have to constantly evolve, but also it's exciting that we'll be exposed to all of this and you get to learn and then we experience that journey. So absolutely. I mean, just this other day I was talking about it's no longer just about companies putting agents or robot bots that mimic what the companies were doing. We may have a whole replica or a clone of ourselves doing something that we want them to do. And it's mind boggling to think, okay, so how do you then think of what do you do? You no longer just one customer. You could be a human customer, a clone. so so it's just exciting to see where this whole thing is going to go, but also be grounded that, hey, you're never going to be the only person in demand or the only technology that's talked about. So it's always about being grounded about that. So it's exciting times.
Right. Exciting times, definitely. So you're talking about how, all the changes out there, the new possibilities and the emerging technologies. And so I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit. I just got a little curious right here with all the changes going on, with all the advancements in technology. If you had a chance in the world of AI, generative AI, automation, who would you most like to go to lunch
That's a great question. Well, if I tap into my wild side, I would say probably Elon Musk. But but in terms of being more in touch with what we are working with, Microsoft has been doing a lot of work in this space. So Satya Nadella would be another person that comes to mind. So those would be the leaders that probably want to hear personal side of what they're going through.
Awesome. So just a little heads up. I'm a fan of Elon Musk, a fan of what Microsoft is doing. So if you ever get that lunch, don't forget my email. If you can get me in on that lunch too, I would love to be there. So just give me a heads up if you get that lunch. So I would love to be a fly on the wall at that lunch. And so, Praveen, this has been awesome today. I really enjoyed myself. I'm sure our listeners have gathered a wealth of information. And so I thank you for coming on today. And so to our listeners, be sure to tune in to our next episode.
Thank you.
How to Grow Using AI, Machine Learning, and Intelligent Automation is brought to you by eClerx. For more information about services and how we can help your business leverage the power of AI and machine learning, visit our website at www.eclerx.com. That's www.eclerx.com. Don't forget to search for How to Grow Using AI, Machine Learning, and Intelligent Automation on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes. On behalf of everyone here at eClerx, thanks for listening.